Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. We talked Sunday night, we talked all tournament, but we also talked the chaos at Kentucky with John Calipari. If you listen to Sunday night's show, where we last left off, listen, Thursday happens. We know it's bad. We don't need to go through what happened. Jack Golke just Golkeing all over the Kentucky Wildcats. But Thursday happens. Friday, it gets kind of quiet. And you think, okay, it's going to be business as usual on Saturday at Kentucky, or going forward at Kentucky. We're going to forget about this. Everybody's going to move on. Then, of course, Saturday morning, my buddy Matt Jones, Kentucky Sports Radio, puts out a tweet that basically insinuates that Mitch Barnhart is really thinking about getting rid of John Calipari, that the money is there, that if this move needs to be made, it could be made. And oh, by the way, it could be made as early as Monday. Well, when we recorded on Sunday night, we found out that Calipari wasn't even in Lexington. He was returning on Monday. And the assumption is, okay, something big is going to happen on Monday. They're going to meet. It's going to get crazy. Maybe Calipari won't be there. And then Monday happens, and a funny thing comes out, and this is where I want to pick up the story. About Monday midday, we find out that John Calipari has his normal radio show, the final radio show of the year, and that he's appearing on the radio show. So in a situation where 24 hours before, we're 12 hours before, where we woke up on Monday, we weren't even sure if he was going to be the head coach. We find out that he's doing the radio show, that he plans on speaking. And I'll be honest, I listened to a little bit of it. I didn't listen to a ton of it. But what I heard, everything I heard was Calipari was talking and speaking as though he was going to be the next head coach or he was going to be the head coach of the University of Kentucky next year. So the Monday radio show happens. We finally find out on Tuesday that these two sides have met, John Calipari with his AD, Mitch Barnhart. And right before I came on here on Tuesday night, we find out that John Calipari is, in fact, returning to Kentucky after meeting with Mitch Barnhart. So I have a lot of thoughts. Let's dive in. Drop your comments below. We will get to all of them momentarily. But I think my first thought on all of this is that I do think in hindsight, and listen, I'm not criticizing anyone's reporting. Matt Jones is a good friend of mine. I don't get the sense that at any point John Calipari was really in danger of losing his job. That's not criticizing Matt. That's not criticizing anybody else who put it out there. But I just think the way that everything went down, Calipari leaves, Calipari returns, Calipari is allowed to do his radio show. That does not sound to me like a guy that somebody was going to throw their body in the way of it and say, Coach Cal, take off radio today. We need you to come into the office. So I don't know if it was ever as intense as maybe we all thought it was. And I include myself. I'm guilty as charged here. But you know what else this speaks to me about? Is that, listen, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I have obviously been very critical of John Calipari. Critical of him in terms of the SEC tournament loss. Critical of him in terms of the Oakland loss. But let me also say this. You know what this also says to me? What this says to me is that there is chaos in the athletic department beyond John Calipari. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, let me say this. Mitch Barnhart, at the end of the day, you can like him, you can hate him, you can agree with his policies, you can disagree with his policies, whatever. He is still John Calipari's boss. And I don't believe that he should have let John Calipari do that media availability until something came out of his office, if there were reports out that John Calipari might be let go, okay? If you're going to let John Calipari do that media availability on Monday night, I think you have to put out a statement beforehand so there's no confusion. I'm not going to blame John Calipari on that. He's going through business as usual. You can agree with how he conducts his business, but at the same time, he's going about it as business as usual. And as the AD, as his boss,
It's your job to do one of two things. To either sit there and say, sorry, Coach Cal, you're not going to do radio until we talk. Or what I think Mitch Barnhart actually probably should have done was put out a statement basically saying that John Calipari is the head coach of Kentucky basketball. What he should have done before he allowed Calipari to take that mic without anybody knowing what Calipari's future was, what he should have done is put out a statement. It didn't have to be complicated. It could have been simple. All you got to say is as follows. We're all disappointed with how this season ended. This is not the Kentucky standard. I know there's frustration, but at the same time, John Calipari is our coach going forward, and we plan on meeting later in the week. But to stop any confusion, to stop any chaos around the program, John Calipari is our head coach. That did not happen. And so John Calipari goes into that media availability not knowing if he's the head coach. I assume he probably knew. But we're all listening. We're all wondering, like, is he going to approach this like he's going to be the coach next year? So it happened that way. And I think Mitch Barnhart, as his boss, needs to step in and do something. And I was texting with a couple Kentucky fans on Monday night. And I think that's the sentiment here. And for people who don't know the inner workings of Kentucky, I don't blame you if you don't. But at the same time, these two do not get along, and they do not speak. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's adult. As I joked on my buddy John Neighbor's show, he's a radio host in Arkansas. I said, this is like grumpy old men, Walter Matthau and the other guy, whatever his name was, Bob Lemon or whatever, something Lemon. Like, they're just grumpy and they're mean and they don't like each other. But Mitch Barnhart, you're John Calipari's boss. It is your job to call him into your office and say, we need to talk, or it's your job to put something out so your fan base knows what to expect. Now, in terms of the decision to bring him back, listen, I had a lot of people ask me once it became official. I am not here to say what is right and wrong, okay? We don't know the exact parameters of John Calipari's contract. We don't know if really buying him out was realistic. What I would say is I do believe, and I said this the night of the Oakland game, I said I do believe it's probably best for everybody to move on. I'm not saying that Cal is the worst coach that has ever coached at Kentucky. He had a great 10, 12, 15-year run, okay? But the last 3, 4, 5 years are not up to the Kentucky standard. And so my concern with bringing him back is pretty straightforward. I don't really think anything's going to change. They have a 6-man recruiting class already signed up for next year. Now, maybe you get lucky and Reed Shepherd says business not finished. Maybe you get lucky and a DJ Wagner or somebody else doesn't have the draft stock that they think they have and they decide to come back. But even then, you got 6 freshmen. They're not all going to play. So, like, even if you're bringing back some veterans, you're still going to be relying on freshmen. Now, to me, and I talked about this on the show on Sunday, I'm not as worried about the freshmen as everybody else is because the freshmen got you second place in the toughest SEC ever. But it is clear that some kind of change probably needs to happen. Calipari referenced bringing in a defensive coach, somebody, getting the defense back up to their standard. But it doesn't change the fact that it does feel like it's run its course. Now, what I will also say, a couple other things. I think it probably would have been best for everybody if John Calipari had moved on, if they had moved on from each other. But Cal was never resigning. By the way, if you go back to the tweet I put out on Thursday after they lost to Oakland, I said it'd be best if John Calipari resigned. Why did I use the term resign? It's because I know he is way too stubborn to ever actually step aside. So I knew that was not going to happen. And so because I knew that wasn't going to happen, I said, well, you got to resign at that point. It's not going to happen. But what I will also say is this. As frustrated as Kentucky fans are, I think there are 2 things that you do need to consider in terms of Calipari coming back. One, I don't think Mitch Barnhart, the AD, was ready financially or mentally, and we talked about this, to do a coaching search the day of the Oakland game, okay? I think he woke up the day of the Oakland game. He said, we're going to win this. I don't love Cal. We don't get along, but we're going to get through this, and hopefully we can make a little run. No one expected to lose to Oakland. And so when you lose to Oakland, what I truly believe happened was, I just think it was scramble mode, fire drill. I can't believe this is happening. And so one, Mitch Barnhart, first off, he's got to raise that whatever the amount is that you have to pay John Calipari tomorrow if you fire him, okay? That's one. Two, and this is the important part. You got to make sure somebody's going to say yes. You got to make sure that if Scott Drew's your number one guy, that he's going to say yes. If you think you can get Jay Wright, you can't wait a week until the tournament's done and Jay Wright's done it with CBS if you think you can get him. And you could debate whether he's a real candidate or not. That's not the point of this conversation. The point I'm trying to make, it sucks in the moment for Kentucky fans because I think everybody, even the biggest Cal supporters, were basically ready to move on after Oakland. But the counter to that is if you don't know you're going to get a yes, I don't think it's the worst thing to bring them back for another year. You're going to get some of the guys from this year's team back. The freshman class is going to be really good. The Travis Perry kid just won a state championship at Rupp Arena this past weekend. Carter Knox is good. Boogie Fland is good. Jaden Quaintance is good, etc. Not saying they're going to be as good as this year's group, Reed Shepherd, all that. But maybe you get one of those guys back. Maybe get a couple of them back with this freshman class. What I do think will happen, I think Mitch Barnhart is going to spend the next 360 plus days waiting to see what happens in the 2025 tournament. And if it goes the way this NCAA tournament went, then yes, I do think John Calipari will be out after next year. And I think Mitch Barnhart will be prepared for it after the NCAA tournament next year. We compared it a few days ago to the Jimbo Fisher situation. Jimbo Fisher 2 years ago, it hasn't been great, but he goes, you think he's going to be okay. He goes 5-7, and nobody at A&M was prepared for that. Then you know what they did? They gave him that offseason. He hired Bobby Petrino, but the second it went sideways, the money was in line. They were ready to do the search. And you can agree or disagree that Mike Elko is the right guy. I like Mike Elko, but they had a plan in place, and I just don't think that plan was there. So we'll see what happens, but John Calipari is back. I see the YouTube chat is just going bananas right now. I will get to some of your comments later. But as far as the Calipari stuff, I can't sit here and lie and say that I'm totally surprised that he's back. I think once we got to Monday midday and he's doing his radio availability, I think it became pretty obvious he was coming back. I think it probably would have been best for everybody if he moved on, but I also don't think it's the worst thing.